still got the real property.
They didn't take the building.
It's different than when you give a TIF for just to get a business in that's supposedly going to add jobs. That doesn't help the community as much because they're not getting any. Maybe if it's been an empty building, you can get a higher tax value.
Yeah, but
it's not enough. It's if it's new construction or major renovation.
When they put $40 million into an expansion, even if you gave them free incremental taxes for a number of years, well, you don't lose.
One of the things that in the jobs bill that the legislature did in this session, one of the things there for small businesses, and particularly in an innovation economy, there's just to set up the business, there's an expense to pay. You have to pay the minimum corporate tax, which isn't a lot, but for somebody that doesn't have the money and they're trying to market it.
When you're not taking a salary and you're borrowing money for expenses.
So it's still a burden. So what we do in that is for the first 3 years of their operation, they can get a tax credit to offset the full cost of that tax, so that they really can be tax-free unless they're producing something that's taxable. And so that kind of thing. The other thing that we're working on, and the administration's already done a lot of this, looking at the regulations that have been built up over the years, whether they're all needed, and they've found a number of them that they've rescinded, to try to reduce some of the bureaucracy and overload of regulation.
Let's take a look at a regulation, something that you and John have been working on.
Right.
You know, EPA comes to town and says, we think we possibly know of a way of maybe helping out this phosphorus. And we want each of you 3 towns on a pilot program to donate $60 to $100 million. Now, if there's a regulation that I don't understand, and I'm a chemist by training, I can understand.
I mean, everybody wants clean water.
Yes.
I don't think there's anybody that really
everybody wants world
advocates
peace.
Pollution. But what we haven't heard, and neither John or I think are convinced that one is that what they're asking communities and particularly businesses to do, that it'll do what they want.
Will it work?
The one thing that we are making progress on is dealing with legislation that would be a statewide ban on using phosphorus in fertilizer and also nitrogen.
See, now Dick, okay, I've got a bag of fertilizer. I can chase it when it's in a little bag, or I can spread it out across how many square miles.
And then try to clean it up.
And then try and clean it up.
Yeah.
I guess I'm in the same place you are, which says fix it up front.
Fix it up front, and what we would do with it, we've talked to the industry as far as the manufacturers of the fertilizer. They're changing anyway.
But you got one big dog, right?
Yeah, Scott.
Scott owns 70%?
About 70% of the market, and they're making the change, and so the others, their competitors, because they'll be more in demand, the competitors will want to make their change too.
But even if they didn't?
If they didn't, they'll lose business. So
but you got 70% reduction?
Yeah. Well, you get, and to have that ban, the EPA will give you a credit, basically, of at least 30% of what otherwise you'd have to be spending to fix the problem. So that in itself will be a help. There's some maintenance kinds of things like sweeping the parking lots more regularly, cleaning the storm
cleaning the
drains
catch basins. Now we have to do twice a year instead of once.
And those things are not too big a burden.
We're paying an extra $25,000 a year.
Yeah.
When Scotty came and said, now I got to clean the dirt out twice a year.
If that helps businesses stay here.
But $25,000 I can deal with.
Yeah.
$60 million?
A huge difference, obviously. And one that we don't know that it'll solve the problem.
Well, especially where you have an alternative.
Yeah.
I feel a lot more comfortable saying, the Dick and John show of let's get the phosphates out of Massachusetts to begin with.
And that's
has a good chance of working, because if we don't introduce them.
Well, and I think if we have that in, and if the communities work together and with the state to make sure that nobody's somehow getting it around. If you can't buy it, you won't be able to put it on the ground anyway.
But would most homeowners, when I go down to Lowe's or True Value and I buy fertilizer.
They don't go looking to see if there's phosphorus in it or not.
That's what I'm saying. Most people don't have the chemistry background to say, let me look at the elements.
So
that
the
are
idea is that, we make sure that what's available is stuff that's not going to cause the problems that EPA
that it
is
works.
worried
It makes
about.
my grass green and it doesn't pollute the water.
And I think, that will, so what I think we should be doing is get that in place. Let's see how it works for the next few years, and if it really makes the difference. And the problem is not just Milford and Bellingham and Franklin that are going to be burdened with this. It's ultimately going to be everybody.
No, we
up
were
and
the
down
goats. We were the tethered goats that are going to be put out there and say, will it work?
And it's not just in the state, because they're doing this all over the country. They're doing pilot projects right now, but ultimately the goal, I'm sure, would be to go everywhere. Now, it's been over 40 years that we've had the Clean Water Act, and probably be another 40 before they get to where they think they should be, and even then.
The Cleaner Water Act.
Yeah, but it's something that, especially in a tough economy, we shouldn't be rushing into it. Even if it's a good economy, we ought to make sure that it's worth doing.
Talk to me about the election. I'm getting, I'll say it, I should. I'm getting disgusted. I don't want to vote against somebody. And right now, I don't know that Romney or Obama they're both teeing me off. Because all I hear is, he's a bum. No, he's a bigger bum. No, he's the biggest bum. I don't get it. What's your take on this?
Well, sadly, it's what it goes on at a lot of levels in politics and turns people off. In many cases, as a result, they don't vote. Others, it turns other people off who would be good candidates if they wanted to get involved. So it's not a healthy thing at all. And the problem is that we're seeing at the congressional level, certainly, and now we're starting to see in some of the states, people at the right and left, the extremes of the right and left, are getting elected instead of people that are more moderate. And
I'm not sure who scares me more, an ultra-liberal or an ultra-conservative. They both scare the heck out of me.
I think ultra of either is probably not the best solution. Because you really need, and at any event, you need to have enough of people that are closer to the middle and use some common sense to get laws passed or change them in the process. So I'm concerned about what's going on. Just this past year, the year before I was president of our national conference state legislatures. We alternate party in who the president is each year. So the fellow who succeeded me was the Senate president in Kansas. He just lost his primary to he's a Republican and a pretty conservative one, to a more conservative Republican. And 7 of his Republican colleagues also were defeated in their primary by the effort of folks that are more conservative, and the governor, who is also more conservative on it. And one of the senators was telling me, a Republican senator who did get renominated, that he brought David Eisenhower in to talk to the governor. And David Eisenhower said, my grandfather probably could not get elected, at least in Kansas, as a Republican, and Kansas was his home state, today, because Ike was more middle of the road. Even though he was, to a Democrat, he probably thought he was conservative, but he worked toward the middle, and most presidents have tended to govern from the middle because that's how you can get solutions.
Strength. I always got the biggest laugh out of when somebody looked at John Fernandez and said, how is it to exist in the legislature when you're so conservative? And the look on John's face when he said, conservative, what does that make Dick Moore, a Republican? But you look and you say, to me, the conservative Democrat, the liberal Republican, that area in the middle is a comfortable place.
Well, Massachusetts has a reputation, particularly in other states, of being very liberal. We're actually not. The legislature this year, we dealt with some issues dealing with people who drive without licenses, whether they're illegal immigrants or people that have lost their license for drunk driving or some other issue. And we were able to get legislation that increased the penalties for driving without a license. You had to give a legal residence to register the vehicle. If you couldn't knowingly let someone who's not licensed to drive, and increase the penalties for
But
business.
Dick, there's some confusion.
That was passed by a legislature with overwhelming Democratic majorities, and the governor vetoed one provision, the legal residence piece, and it was unanimously overridden. And so, and some would say that that's conservative.
Well, but I mean, when I look at Massachusetts, we've always been socially liberal, but physically conservative. At the end of the day, I think people like to do an a la carte when they're in the middle of the campaign. And I guess that's the part you mentioned, that you almost felt like people were going to vote for the person they dislike least.
Well, and that's and we run into that more often, at least for the presidential race, sometimes at the governor's level, than you'd like to be voting for somebody, and not for them because they're the least of the two evils or three
Right.
evils, whatever a number are running. But the antagonism that exists and the name calling and everything else that goes on during the course of a campaign, oftentimes with no truth to it, sometimes with a little bit of truth, but exaggerated on one side or the other, that we get so unhappy with any of the candidates that we kind of hold our nose and say, well, I guess we could vote for this one because
Well, it
they
just
offended me
annoys
less than somebody
Don't
else.
tell me why he's so bad. And if it was a Republican only, I could vilify them. But both parties are sinking,
Yeah.
and you're sitting there saying, no, tell me what you're going to do. Make me feel good. When Obama won, I remember talking to somebody saying, right, wrong, or indifferent, he's our president. You got to rally behind him now, because if he doesn't win, we're all in trouble. Come next election, you can have a different opinion. But at least during...
And we've had, the times, and it's not within our lifetime, the Congress used to be able to sit down at least after the voting and talk to each other as human beings.
As Americans?
Yeah. And, the great example that's cited a lot is Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Philosophically, quite at opposite extremes. But maybe, I don't know if it was just their common Irish heritage or what, but I think it was that both of them were people persons, and they could have their arguments, but then they could sit down and have a drink or play cards or do something.
It's not personal. I think that's the part that bothers me. I mean, we've got people in town where I've had knockdown disagreements with privately. But afterwards, nobody says, I've got to agree with Dick Moore, John Fernandez all the time. Probably never will, but on balance...
It's gotten to the point in the Congress, or seems to have. It reminds me a few years back, before the peace process in Northern Ireland started. I met with a delegation of parliamentarians from Ireland. And one of the delegation was a member of Sinn Féin, which was at the time was viewed as verging on terrorism, if not actually there. But as the political wing of the Irish Republican
Of IRA.
And so I innocently said, well, let's have a photo taken of the group. Oh no, they weren't going to.
All of us in one. No.
They weren't going to do the Sinn Féin guy. I had to have a separate picture with him.
Right.
He wouldn't, and then I got to have a picture with the other group, but they would not get in the same photo, only because it would be political suicide to them, and maybe even legal suicide.
Well, with them it'd be actual suicide.
And so they wouldn't do it, and it's almost not. It's not fatal in the sense of life, but it's fatal politically.
Sure. For
some members of Congress to be seen with another. I happened to meet when I was in Washington at a meeting with Orrin Hatch. Hatch was renominated by his party, but he had to struggle to get there in Utah. But what was being used against him was his picture being taken with Ted Kennedy, and that was being, he was being vilified. And he was actually one of the guys that probably helped Kennedy come more to the center, but also helped him with some of his personal issues as well. And yet, to the extremes of his party, that was
you're laying with the enemy.
Treason. Yeah.
Now, there's some confusion over the 3 strikes law.
Oh yeah.
where people are, I'm hearing people say,
Well-
oh, your third offense, you go to jail for life.
No, well, not necessarily. I mean, if you're sentenced for life on the third offense, then you do.
But it's not automatic.
No, it's not. California, the bill that was out there and may still be in effect, it is your third felony that you don't get out. This is a modification of that. It's that if you are convicted and serve time for 3 violent crimes, felonies, on the third crime, you serve the full sentence, whatever
So
that
if
may
my
be.
third crime, I got sentenced to 5 to 10 years, I'm out in 5 to 10 years.
Well, you'll serve the maximum. You don't